Hi, everybody. Welcome today to QDN's. I've got to remember the exact name of this because we've changed it a few times, but it's Access and Inclusion Paris 2024 and the Runway to Brisbane 2032. I'm a white woman with curly, sort of blondish hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing sort of a lemon type dress today. And I think that today is an exciting day, an opportunity to come together in the spirit of collaboration, innovation, and determination to pave the way for a more inclusive and equitable Queensland. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to hear everyone's insights and ideas on a topic that is very close to my heart. But before we get to hear from our speakers today, which I'm really looking forward to, let's welcome our acknowledgement of country.
We pay our respects to. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within the community. QDN also acknowledges people with disabilities who have come before us and have died in institutional settings, as well as those who are still trapped in institutions or silenced by institutional practices. We take on the responsibility of being clear about the rights of all people with a disability and, when necessarily, speak in an informed and considerate manner for those who cannot speak for themselves.
Thank you so much, Uncle Willie. That was a really lovely acknowledgement of country. Now, there's a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speakers for today. We've got three guest speakers. We've got the Director of Urbis, Julie Saunders, Channel 9 journalist Joss Bravis, and Australian Paralympic swimmer Rachel Watson, OAM. And really looking forward to hearing their stories and their insights as to how we can actually take on some of those things. I know I'm very lucky having Rachel in my Queensland Disability Advisory Council, and we got to hear firsthand all of her stories. So you guys are going to really enjoy that, I know. Today's session will be a microphone off session. To ask a speaker a question, you need to send a message in the chat. If you're not able to use that chat function, text your question. And there's a number there, 0467 346 841. So if you want to write that down, or we also will have it in the chat for you to relook at it. If you're having any technical issues, please put a message in the chat or call 1300 363 783, and a QDN staff member will be able to help you with that. Remember, within the Zoom link, turn on captions, press on the closed caption CC button in the middle bottom of the screen, and then click show subtitles. Now I'm going to hand it over to Steve, who's going to begin the panel discussion, and him and I are going to tag team because we don't have Michelle with us today. So over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Sharon. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well. First of all, welcome to this really important webinar that we're holding together to reflect on Paris and to also look towards the future, to look towards 2032 Games. My name is Steve Coulter. I'm the acting CEO here at QDN, and I'm honoured to welcome you to today's forum. Today, I'm wearing a kind of light-coloured T-shirt, and I've got dark glasses on, and I'm a middle-aged man. Today, we're not just talking about sporting achievements, we're also talking about the power of events like the Olympics and Paralympics, and how we can drive that change and to challenge how we think about inclusion, accessibility, and what is the opportunity for Brisbane, Queensland, but also the wider country of Australia. We've seen through Paris and countless other global events that sport is more than competition. It is a platform for transformation of communities and people. From breaking down barriers to rewriting social narratives, these events have the power to unite people and to shine a light on the abilities and contributions of every individual. But this is only possible if we act with intention. The legacy of 2032 Games must go beyond medals and moments of triumph. It must leave behind a society where everyone, regardless of disability or ability, can thrive. Game Changers, what we launched in April, developing an inclusive employment legacy for the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games, was launched by QDN and Urbis. To much stakeholder and political interest, this report isn't just a document, it's a blueprint, and today we'll also talk about that with Julie. We will also insert a link to the report further in the chat. This report was a real starting point for QDN and Urbis to build on the global insights from London to Tokyo to Paris and into the future of Brisbane 32. We also know that the Games can leave a legacy. The biggest one could be employment, and to break down the barriers faced by people with disability. So it's not just about jobs, it's about dignity, independence, and full participation in society, and the opportunity that Brisbane 2030 can bring. We're also going to learn today about what we can learn from Paris. The main draws out of Paris is collaboration is key. In Paris, government, businesses, and community organisations came together to tackle accessibility and inclusion. Long-term impact, the French legacy plans did robust frameworks to measure the impact on accessibility, employment, and attitudes. Brisbane has the chance to build on the foundations of Paris. And the role of QDN, as a peak executive organisation, we're committed to ensuring that the voices of people with disability are not only heard, but amplified. The success of 2032 Games will depend on co-design, working side by side with the community to ensure that these aspirations are grounded in a lived experience for all. So with much to discuss, I could talk forever about this. I'm really passionate, but I would like to first introduce Julie. Julie is the director of Urbis. We have the pleasure at QDN of working with Julie for a while now. Urbis is a consulting firm offering services in planning, design, property, social planning, economics, and research. Julie is an urban planner with over 25 years' experience. Her passion for serving community is demonstrated in her experience across various levels of government, the not-for-profit sector, as well as the private sector. Julie was recently appointed by the Minister as the chair of the Housing Supply Expert Panel and also as the chair of the Queensland chapter of Learning Environments Australasia. Julie, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Steve, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to come on and talk to you about this great piece of work that Urbis has completed in collaboration with QDN. As Steve said, I'm a director here at Urbis and I work particularly in social policy and strategy. Me too, I'm middle-aged and I am wearing a white dress and I have lightish blonde hair with some dark glasses and I'm wearing some headphones today to help facilitate this session. I just want to check whether the PowerPoint came through or will I share my own screen as we kick off to give you an overview of the work that we've completed.
It has come through, Julie, so I'm happy to
drive for me. That would be great. Yep.
Just give me a moment.
You're right. While you do that, I'll introduce the project. And on behalf of Urbis, we completed this work pro bono, and we do have a specific give back approach to our organisation. And we look for particular work where we can use our skills, knowledge, and network to amplify and to advocate on behalf of particular issues and areas that we think are important, from creating great communities and great places, which is the core purpose of our firm. And I was delighted that we did receive approval from our executive leadership to undertake this work on that basis. And the formation and foundation of this work occurred after that fabulous disability forum that QDN facilitated last year. And I was having a chat to Michelle in the break, and I said, well, have you got a great baseline and understanding around employment so that you can advocate strongly as part of the legacy provisions? Okay, it won't work. I will share in a moment. And with that, Michelle sort of said, oh, look, we don't really have a comprehensive piece of work that captures all of that. And that was the impetus for the completion of this work. So I will just share some slides with you as we track through. And I hope I am sharing the right screen.
That's always the scariest moment.
I know. I always agree. And I always don't get it to work. But can you see that?
Yep, we can see it there.
And I might put it on the presentation so it pops up. But it's not going to do that. No. Can you see that? Is it effective? Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll kick off. And so that's the cover of the report. And what a great name, Game Changers, about developing inclusive employment legacy from the Olympics and the Paralympics. And, you know, that positioning statement that the Games provides the catalyst and the opportunity, and not just the event itself, but the lead up to, or the runway to the event, and after it, to create a lasting legacy for inclusion, and particularly with people with a disability. If you've read Elevate 2032, sorry, not 2032, if you've read it, there is a foundation pillar that sits in that document, which is around access and inclusion for people with a disability. I mean, there are two foundation pillars, and the other one is in relation to First Nations. And I think it's outstanding the work QDN has done to ensure that positioning within the advocacy plan, and also to Sharon and others that have done some great lobbying in that space. So anything we do as part of legacy for the Olympics has to have those two pillars at its heart. And what a great opportunity that brings. And this piece of work actually focused on, well, what are the employment opportunities and how to create, I suppose, and amplify the need, and call out perhaps, you know, good practices and where we could improve around getting better with people, employing people with a disability. And look, I do call out that I do have a personal interest in this space. My eldest daughter, Casey, who's 22, has an intellectual impairment, autism, and a couple of other things that come with that suitcase, and is an amazing human being. But I thought the education system was broken, but I think the employment system is even more broken for people with a disability trying to access it. And seeing her and her friends navigate post-school into this space is devastating, and also I suppose ignited some fire in my belly to use my skills and knowledge and networks to try and help to shift this dial on behalf of the community. And it is extremely disappointing to see, you know, some of the figures out of this process. And you know, currently, you know, there's less than half of all people with a disability employed in some of those figures. If they are employed, they're underemployed and not used to their full potential. We know that there is 1 in 5 people in Australia that do experience disability, yet the proportion of people in the employment space is less compared to the general population as well. Acknowledge that, particularly those people with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds are even more disadvantaged into this space. And I imagine as the population ages, we will also see that into older persons aspects as well. And so with this sort of, I suppose, vein of, current levels of participation sitting at 4%, what can we do? And what are the opportunities that the Olympics bring? And the project looked at current employers and some, I suppose, shoots of green good. But it also reviewed some mega events like the London Olympics, the Tokyo, and we didn't look at Paris because it was before that work, but we did make some early observations around that, and we looked at the World Cup as well as some examples there. And it really sort of defined this challenge that, across Australia, people with disability face more discrimination and barriers to employment, which I think is well known. But it's also that vision of, for the project that people with disability will have the opportunity for meaningful employment sooner because of the 2032 Olympics and Paralympics. And through that analysis, both with employers and those mega events, it has been very limited in success in trying to achieve transformational and systemic change. Olympics in London was great from a media perspective and use the Paralympics to generate opportunities for people to come in and work in the media centres. Tokyo was a focus on the volunteering program there, and the mega event of the FIFA World Cup was all about amplifying and creating transparency around disability for accessing and sporting opportunities. And what a great platform sport is to create those gateways where we could actually leverage employment opportunities as well. And so the report talks about the partnership of ourselves. We did define the challenge, as I've said, and we looked at the current environment. We undertook some engagement, and we were at the decision makers level, and we had some great conversations, some acknowledging that the work to date has been not enough, and that there is frustration and barriers to getting scale across businesses. But there's also, as we said, great businesses that are doing some great work. And I do note SC Special Services Australia, SCA, and they are the gentleman there is the Queenslander of the Year, heading towards being our representative for the Australian of the Year next January. So I'm out there cheering him to be the Australian of the Year, doing great work there in, I think, over 50% of his business actually employs people with a disability, which is just outstanding. And then there's a range of recommendations in the report, which I just wanted to touch on today quickly. And there is around 3 pillars for those recommendations. It's about positioning the system before the Olympics occurs and looking at a range of actions that can happen to actually try and shift the dial and change processes and barriers to actually allow more of those opportunities to occur. We do have a benchmark that's been set at 12%, which is nation leading. So we're currently at 4, as I said, and heading towards 12. There's no mandate against that, which is one of the recommendations, that we should mandate targets, and also that we should actually change our procurement practices to help deliver that as part of the Olympic process. There's the second pillar, which is about raising the bar, which is the actual event itself and how we can use the mechanics of the event, whether it's volunteering, media, ground roots sports programs, school programs, all those sorts of things about the event, and also the legacy programs that can actually embed and activate more of those opportunities. And then there's the actual legacy. So by 2042, what systemic change and what BAU has happened to actually try and achieve some of those benchmarks and outcomes that the legacy plan and that foundational pillar has done. So there's some quick observations around the report and some of the key findings attached to it. I'm happy to take more questions, or I don't know if you want to pause now, Steve, or keep rolling through and have a Q&A at the end, but in your hands.
That's what we plan to do.
Yeah.
Julie. We will, if you want to take questions, we'll do Josh's overview and Rachel's, and then come back and do a Q&A and open discussion, if that's okay with you. Okay, handing over to Josh now.
My name's Josh. I'm a reporter with 9 News Queensland. So I was honoured enough to be accepted to join 9's reporting team to go over to Paris. I was part of a team of 5 journalists, 3 producers, 2 chiefs of staff, and 2 editors, and we worked as a consolidated news team. Now we've got a little video to just show a little example of the work that I did. And sorry, before we do, so I'm 37. I have short dark brown hair. I'm wearing a blue collared shirt. So we've got a little video here, just one of many stories that we produced while over there. And this particular story we aired from Paris. This was before the games had begun, and this was when Andrew Liveris, the president of Brisbane 2032, had arrived in Paris and had started to have some discussions with some local officials on the ground. And I was able to quiz him what he thought were the similarities and the differences between Paris and Brisbane.
In Paris, it's all understandably about the here and now. But with 2032 approaching fast, and the president of Brisbane's organising committee says there's still time to alter how we plan to host the Games. Addressing officials and international media in Paris, Andrew Liveris said Brisbane can put on a show on a par with this year's event.
Paris has the brilliance of the Eiffel Tower Stadium, the Grand Palais, Stade de France. Brisbane will build temporary stands at QSAC, the no-frills arena, the smallest Games stadium since 1928.
We are the true first deliverer of the new norms.
Brisbane 2032 President Andrew Liveris is on the ground in the Olympic City, and he's in awe.
You think Brisbane can top this?
Top. I don't. You know what? I'm going to beg off and say we'll be different, but different good. Okay? We cannot be Paris. I love Paris. I love Brisbane, but we can't be Paris. I don't have an Eiffel Tower.
He's here to assure international officials and the media that Brisbane is on track.
Brisbane is not a hillbilly town. It's not that strange place up north. It's a very cosmopolitan, maybe not 24/7 yet in terms of opening of venues, but on its way.
8 years out, what are they going to build?
I think we get kind of a little bit of angst about the topic, okay, but we do roll up the sleeves and get the job done.
But the clock is ticking.
There are obviously some changes already. I've been told to keep expecting that until you basically have to time out and say no more, because it's going to cost X. Okay, and I think we're not at that moment.
3 months out from the Queensland election, the state government is adamant it only plans to renovate 3 stadiums, including QSAC, even without a business case.
So it's very important that cost-benefit analysis is done in the project validation report, PVR, on QSAC as an athletic stadium.
The opposition just as vague. Despite the concerns about the burdens to hold the Games, the International Olympic Committee says at least 10 other cities have indicated they'd like to host in 2036 and 2040. Brisbane will have capacity to host the same number of athletes as Paris, and with their current strategy, there'll be thousands fewer fans in the stands. Josh Bavis, 9 News.
So the context of that story was before Paris had got underway, and Brisbane, the plans were to hold the main events at the QSAC, a temporary stadium there with temporary stands. It looks like that is going to change, but that's the context of that story. So I'll just explain a little bit about myself and my experience with Olympics and Paralympics, and then I'll also give some general observations about the venues that I saw in Paris. And then I'll move on to some observations about Paris itself as the city, and then I'll give a summary. So for myself, my very first Olympic and Paralympic Games was in Beijing as a volunteer reporter when I was just finishing my journalism degree at QUT. And then the next experience I had was Paris. So our team was in Paris for 5 weeks. We were reporting from the second day that we were there after getting over some jet lag. And what we reported on was the logistics leading up to the event, the opening ceremony, and then we moved on to the sport. So if an athlete was to win a gold or a silver, it would be my team's job to track down that athlete, try and attend the game if we could predict if they were set up to win a medal, report on them, how they did, and then move on to the next sport. And sometimes there was a day there where I had 3 different stories in the morning and 2 in the afternoon when we were at the peak of our reporting. So some observations of the Paris venues. I want to just say that I think the organisers of the Paris Olympics and Paralympics, they put their best foot forward. It was an enormous task that they were undertaking. They wanted to make the Paris Olympics and Paralympics very grand. They wanted the whole world to see what they were capable of. I think they had good intentions, and I don't want to be critical of some of the things, how it panned out, but I do think that we are at an advantage to look at how things may have worked and didn't work, and we could build on the legacy that they have left to make Brisbane 2032 even more inclusive. So I do want to highlight some aspects, but the purpose of that is for us to keep moving forward and to make Brisbane even better. But it's not a reflection on poor performance of those organisers, because I do think that they were working with every ability that they had. So just from an accessibility point of view, now I'm an able-bodied person and I was able to get around myself, but some things did stick out to me, and maybe one of the reasons why they did was because we had a lot of gear that we had to carry with us. We had there was a 10-kilogram Pelican case that I had to roll around. We also had a trolley that we put all of our camera gear, our tripods. We have a device so we can send vision and a live cross out live to air. So all of that has to fit into this trolley. And when we were navigating some of those venues, we did encounter a lot of problems. Yes, the venues did have temporary footpaths and ramps, but it was often quite convoluted. Even some of the organisers at the venues didn't even know where things were or where we should be going, or how we could access it using ramps only and no stairs. So one of the venues, the Place de la Concorde, which is right in the middle of Paris, where they held the infamous breaking, the breakdancing, skateboarding and BMX. That venue was basically wherever the foot pedestrians would be moving, it was covered in gravel. Where we entered was off one of the main avenues in Paris. We had to walk about 700 meters, weaving our way along a temporary footpath to get to the venue itself. So it's not what I had in mind, where I thought we would rock up to a venue, we go through a gate and we get let in. And it's also the case for a lot of the spectators as well. I don't know exactly why it's designed like that. I think security comes into it from one aspect, because you do have to move through metal detectors and you do need space between gates and venues because you can't have a large crowd moving through. But from an accessibility point of view, that could be a challenge, and that's something that stuck out to me. A lot of the volunteers who were there were very helpful, and a lot of these people were volunteering their time. They weren't getting paid. A lot of university students. And when we asked if there was ramps or lifts, they would often be willing to try and help, but at the end of the day, sometimes they didn't know. And so at one point we'd have, 10 people trying to help us out get down one ramp just so we could get to one level to be where we needed to be. And so when I reflect on that in this context, I do worry that if the crews on the ground aren't aware of how people can move through with full accessibility, so that they can get to where they need to, then that could be a problem. There were some shuttle transfers. If there was a participant attending the games, they could ring a number or log it on a website, and they could actually order a shuttle to come pick them up from their venue and take them to the venue if they needed that special access. It required 48 hours notice in advance, and I do believe it was heavily discounted, because Paris, the organisers did want to make this an accessible games, and they did talk about it a lot, and they held a lot of press conferences about this. So they did have some measures in place. At 6 of the Olympic events and 9 of the Paralympic events, they also offered an audio description service. But again, you had to register for that. It wasn't a case of just rocking up and being able to access that. So there was a bit of planning to come before. Now, actually, overnight, there was a conference in Paris, and that was a lot of the games organisers, disability and accessibility stakeholders, not-for-profit organisations, districts, councils, shopkeepers, transport operators, and tourism and cultural operators. And they actually held a conference, and I'd be interested to see the outcome of this, because it was about what they have learnt from the games experience in terms of accessibility and making sure that they did hit all the checkpoints. So this was a mop-up come, about 3 months on, where they have held a round table, and they're going to formulate that into a report. And I'd encourage us to try and track that down and get those findings so that we could learn from there. So I'll move on to some observations about the city of Paris itself. From an able-bodied perspective, it was hard enough to navigate when you're looking at some of the metro train stations and a lot of the city streets. So I do worry if there was a tourist from another country and they did have accessibility issues, I do worry about how they would be able to navigate the complex streets and train network that is the city of Paris. In the lead up to the games, the ring of steel that went up around the city and around venues, around the River Seine, made it very difficult to walk through. Often pedestrians were corralled into parts of the city where they didn't want to go. Now, that ring of steel lasted about 3 days before the opening ceremony, much largely due to the fact that the ceremony was held along the river. And so the security aspect of that was enormous. Not only did they have to secure one stadium itself, but they had to secure the entire river. So if you were using a wheelchair or you needed some other navigational tools, those 3 days where the ring of steel was around the city, that would be a very difficult operation to navigate. In Paris, they have the underground metro system, which is several layers of underground rail. There's a tramway, so a light rail that operates on the surface, and then there's a network of buses. The city landmarks, again, what I found was the city of Paris is using an old system that they're now trying to retrofit in many aspects. They are making a concerted effort, but I think the job of that is quite enormous, and I don't think they've quite caught up. An example of the Eiffel Tower, you could reach the second level of the Eiffel Tower using a wheelchair, and they have braille services along the way and audio services, but you can't reach the top. Now, they say that's because of a safety aspect, but I would be interested to see the exact reasons. Places like the Sacre-Cœur, the church that's just outside of the main city, again, there is one wheelchair access point, but it's hard to find, and you're navigating through lots of the crowds to do that. So the city itself, they are trying, but there are shortfalls as well. So in the year 2005, local authorities decided that they would make the city as accessible as possible by the year 2025. And they are claiming that they hit that around April this year, 2024. Now, when you look at what does accessible mean, well, the bus network itself, they said that the bus network is considered to be 100% accessible if 70% of the stops are accessible. Now, to me, that doesn't quite sound, that's not a vote of confidence, because often if you miss a stop, it is very hard to navigate to try and find your way back. Over the last 3 years, work's been carried out on 380 sites to make that target, and that has cost the City of Paris 22 million euros. The tramway is also considered to be 100% accessible. That's the light rail on the surface. And they have 8 lines with 184 accessible stations covering 103 kilometres. But again, not all of them are included in that. So I do wonder why they consider that 100%. Where Paris did make some interesting progress, they had accessibility ambassadors that would go out and meet with shopkeepers in the years and months leading up to the games to try and see how they could improve their stores and raise general awareness. There were other innovations that were also rolled out, like 200 remote controls that could actually control the traffic lights at a pedestrian stop. So they were handed out to people if they were asked. The way being that someone arrives at a traffic stop, they press the remote control, that gives them the green light, and they have a clear way forward. But when you compare that to Australia, where we are already ahead leaps and bounds, you see that as just a drop in the ocean to what they actually could do. There's the Tourist Office of Paris was offering 100% accessible maps to provide to visitors so that they could navigate around different neighborhoods. There was also a list of cultural sites and venues that you could attend that were accessible, and also where there's help on hand for people who need that extra help when they arrive at either a venue or an icon. So my overall summary would be that the organisers of Paris 2024 did put in a concerted effort around accessibility from a range of accessibilities. They wanted to make this a good experience for visitors and competitors from a range of background. And work was done in the years leading up to these events to make that happen. Special technology was deployed to enhance the experience at different Olympic sites. But the city itself is hard to navigate. And when I think of Paris compared to Brisbane, we've been operating on a framework where a lot of these ideas have been institutionalized, they've been legislated, so that when we are constructing different venues just in our day-to-day operations of the city, it's already built in to the fabric of our city. And I would argue that we are ahead in that space. Some of the venues weren't very, not only just for, they weren't very good in terms of accessibility, not just because of the physical elements of the building and the design of the venue, but every venue if it was outdoors, could not be covered with a shade. And I was told that this was a security reason. But what we ended up having was at Place de la Concorde, which is an entire park of a light granite on the ground and a lot of cement structures around, in 35 degrees Celsius heat, just turned it into an absolute oven. There was one day in particular, this is at the height of summer, where the medics on site were actually taking people away on stretchers. These were spectators who had come to enjoy the Olympic venue, and they were being taken away by medics just because it was so hot. I saw a pregnant woman being taken away. There were some elderly, some children, and some just middle-aged people being taken away because it was so hot. Now, again, or just on the security aspect of that, I was told that the officials needed line of sight from higher aspects down into the venue so they could see what was happening. But the result of that was that people were just being baked. So I'd like to see in a Brisbane framework, I know it's going to be winter when we hold the games, but I'd like to think that there is a work around that, because that was just simply not good enough. I'd like to see some more of the historical sites around Europe to be more accessible, not just for wheelchair accessibility, but also to have audio services. One thing that did work well, there was an app that was rolled out, and so a user could take that into a venue and get audio assistance to not only navigate around the venue, but to also get a description of what was happening that day. So I thought that was a great idea. So to sum all of this up, if we were to consolidate all of this into three aspects, I would say that the city planners need to take into consideration physical elements of the venues and icons around the city to make the games an accessible place to visit. I'd say that technology can be used to give the user the power in their hand, whether it's by apps or another mechanism, so that they have power to plan their trip, their journey, and their day while they're out and about. And the third would be the awareness, and to have those cultural ambassadors or the accessibility ambassadors to go out before the games to raise awareness among the community, and to also be on hand when there are visitors to help them navigate. I think if those three pillars or aspects are brought together, that's what can drive a better games for everyone to enjoy. So I would like to see the legacy outcomes of Paris 2024. And if I can track that down, I would like to pass it on to the QDN team as well, so that we can take those lessons and implement it into our planning here as well.
Thank you so much, Josh. And if you could track it down, we would love to see that. That was very, very insightful, Josh. I think everyone has sort of taken a lot from your experience of being there for several weeks before and during the game. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for you at the end. So I'd like to welcome our final panelist for today, Rachel Watson, OAM. Rachel's an Australian Paralympian swimmer who at her first Paralympic Games won a gold and set a new Paralympic record in the women's 50-meter freestyle. She also competed in, I believe, Rio, Tokyo, and Paris. And correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but we've got you listed as 3 Olympics. So well done, and thank you for representing Australia. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. And I just want to apologise that my camera's not working for anyone in the room. That I'm wearing a pink shirt, I've got brown hair, and I'm sitting in a wheelchair. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of a visual if there's anyone who hasn't seen me race on TV. So as Steve said, I'm a 3-time Paralympian. So I've been to Rio, Tokyo, and Paris. And I've been really fortunate to be in a position where I've had some really incredible experiences, and the results have reflected that. So I have won a gold medal in Rio, and I have done a back-to-back gold in Tokyo as well. So the same event, which was incredible. And then at the recent Games in Paris, I won 2 bronze medals in the 50-meter and 100-meter freestyle. Now, this has given me a really, really unique insight, and I was sitting here listening to what you just said, Josh, about your experience as a reporter, and what you said about just carrying equipment was quite insightful, because I think that gives you a little bit of a understanding of what it's like when something as simple as a footpath just is not flat, right? You feel every bump, it gets difficult, especially when it's a hot day. So, like you raised the point about the heat, I'm really, really concerned about that as well. And I really hope that, when we're planning Brisbane 32, all of these things are really factored in, because whilst I can speak as an athlete, we still have routes where, we're around with the public, and there's just a lot of people in one area at one time. So with the planning for Brisbane 32, something we really need to be mindful of is how busy is our areas going to get, and what is the backup plan? Because something Paris really struggled to do is even just getting athletes to venues on time with the transport was a really hard thing for them to do, because whilst they had control over the plan of having lots of buses, what they didn't have control over was how many people were going to be on that bus and how they were going to navigate Paris traffic, because a lot of the time we were still in a really general lane, and we still had a lot of people driving on the roads. So, and a lot of the buses also weren't air conditioned. So, if you're an athlete and we're stuck in traffic and it's race day, it's extremely hot, but it's also, for a lot of us, me included, it actually made us feel a little bit unwell. So we had to then work out with our planning to actually get to a venue a lot earlier, simply so that we could be cooling down in the air conditioning. And that's something we really don't want to have to happen in Brisbane, because I think that whole issue could be completely mitigated if proper planning was put in place of mandating that every single bus must have air conditioning, and not just relying on a window to be open. And I know that might not sound like a big issue on the scheme of things when we look at planning an accessible and inclusive games, but it's about the experience. So not just for the athletes, but for their spectators. And we're really hoping that Brisbane 32 brings out lots and lots of spectators, not just who are able-bodied with no disability, but we're really wanting to see people embracing disability and going, okay, perhaps for the very first time ever in my life, I can actually attend an event because it's completely accessible. But to do that, we need to make sure the route is accessible, and not only the venue, but the entire experience. And every time I go away, there's still issues when someone will tell me, oh, just turn left, that's the accessible entrance, or that's the accessible way here. And often there's still a problem with it. So what it's telling me is that it hasn't necessarily been completely road tested by a user in a wheelchair, or a carer assisting a user in a wheelchair, or a large group of people. So I really want to see for Brisbane 32 that when we plan it, that every single planning decision is road tested. So it's road tested by someone with a disability if we're looking at the Paralympics. And it's not just road tested in the sense of they're just going to try it once. We need to have different people with different disabilities, different weather conditions, so that we really know that every single need is catered for. Because when we plan, we need to plan proactively. And I know there's a lot of work that goes in the background on that, but sometimes I think when we plan, we forget about the purpose. So we think about the big picture, but we don't think about all the little things that can actually make or break a good experience. Now, something that's really important with the planning that I found in Paris that was really difficult is accessible bathrooms. So at the pool, there was only 2 of them, and they were always locked, always used, always full, purely because lots and lots of people in a wheelchair needed those accessible bathrooms because we couldn't use the other ones. And also, oh, sorry. Sorry, I just had a technical issue there. But the other thing also is the list as well. So something that I think they really struggle with, especially when they're building new buildings, is they're never ever putting enough lifts or enough bathrooms in a building. And I know there's a space requirement. I know there's also a requirement of how many people can be seated at a venue. But when we're looking at running a really accessible and inclusive games, we need to make sure that people can get up and down and to the bathrooms in a really timely manner without difficulty. Because if they can't, the feedback's going to be the event was great, but the experience was terrible. And we really don't want something as simple as an overcrowded lift, a slow lift, a hot lift, or a bathroom that's always locked and engaged, being what people complain about when they talk about when they went and watched someone run on the track or swim in the pool. And I know it might sound really, a little bit like I'm complaining about something really small, but they're the things that people are going to pick up on. And they're the things that people's minds and eyes are going to go to instead of the actual sporting experience. So I really hope that our Brisbane 32 planning is thinking about the little things and not just focusing on the sport and the actual outcome of the sport. So I think part of that process needs to be that we're really involving people with a disability in the planning, and we're asking them the questions of what would make this a difficult experience for you, what would make this a good experience for you, and also if we could do anything to improve this experience, what would it be? And if we can't, what else should we think of? Because with our existing buildings that we'll be using for Brisbane 32, some of these things can't be changed. Some of these things we know will be challenges and we can't shy away from it. And that's the fact and that's the reality. So then comes into the question of how do we plan around it and how do we do it successfully? So I'm really about wearing a couple of hats when I think about this sort of topic. And one of it is obviously as the athlete hat, as someone, doing the sport. But another hat that I really like to wear is looking at who is supporting me. And this is quite relevant for a lot of you because when you do your job for planning for 32, it's not just you, there's a lot of other people around you. And I think it's really important to make the team around you as diverse as possible. Because otherwise you're not getting the full picture. So, and a lot of things are going to be retrospected, whereas they could have been planned and done properly. And I worry with Brisbane that people are going to expect something big and bold after LA because LA will do things in a really big way. And like Andrew just said, we're not Paris, we're not LA. We don't have things that they have, but we have things in Brisbane that other places around the world doesn't have. One of the big things with Brisbane 32 that I really want to see come out of it is the legacy of employment for people with a disability. And like Julie was just talking about, it's really, really hard for someone with a disability to find a job. But it's also really hard for them to find a job that they like, that they enjoy, but that actually uses their skill set to the capabilities that their skill set allows them to use it for, instead of putting them into something that's really not as impactful and meaningful. So I think we need to really look at long-term employment opportunity after the Brisbane 32 Games, and not just having a contract where people are employed for a couple of months leading into the Paralympic Games and during the Paralympic Games. But I'd really like to see that these people are given long-term employment as a result of the Paralympic Games. It's just a couple of thoughts from me. There's obviously a lot that we could talk about on this topic, but I really hope that Brisbane 32 transforms Australia. And I know that's a big ask for people who have positions where they get to make the decisions about this, but I really want to see that people look back at it and they go, wow, this is what it feels like to be in Australia. And they don't think to themselves, I have a better opportunity if I'm not in Australia. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And I'll pass you back on in case there's any questions that you'd like to ask any of us. It'd be really great to hear from what everyone on the call has to say, because we love sharing our insights as well. But thank you for having me, and hopefully that was a little bit of an insight into the tiniest layer that we've scratched off the surface today.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I mean, your insights have been really, really valuable and has provoked a lot of text questions to come in. So thank you to all our speakers today. Also, thank you to Joss and Julie as well. We appreciate the time that you've given towards joining QDN today. So what I would say, sorry, my video's just cut off for some reason, is we've got a few questions in by text. So the first one is actually for Josh. Josh, what do you think the media representation of people with disability might look like in Australia ahead of 2032? That's a very good question.
Very good question. And I guess I'll take that from two aspects, being what the media representation of the ones telling the story and the ones who are in the story. Look, I think at the moment in the Australian media landscape, there are some organisations that do better than others at representing people with a disability, for those telling the story, and also to be included in. I know the ABC, where I used to work for more than a decade, has come leaps and bounds in that space, and they do pride themselves on showcasing journalists and hiring journalists from all different backgrounds and some with a disability. And the insight that they get then to tell the stories from their own perspectives to a wider audience, I think puts them at an advantage and provides for a more inclusive media landscape. So I would like to see all media organisations moving in that direction. Often things get overlooked in the hurly-burly of daily news, but I would like to see more focus on accessibility into things like the Olympics, leading up and into the games. I know that comes also with it. I guess it follows when there's political leadership in that space. For example, if the mayor or the premier starts holding round tables around that, the media tends to follow. Sometimes the media does need a bit of a push if they're not doing that already. So I would encourage people in public spaces, and I would encourage everyone who's listening to, put forward your stories or ideas. If you know a journalist, or you're welcome to come to me. But unless there's that groundswell, the media sometimes does a bit of navel gazing, and we can overlook these really important issues. So hopefully we're heading in the right direction, but sometimes we need a bit of prodding.
Thank you so much for that, Josh.
Steve?
Yeah, sorry, Sharon.
Sharon here. I have a question for Rachel. I don't know, I didn't type it into the chat, sorry. But Rachel, I would just like to hear from your perspective as a person who uses a chair with high-level disability and who is a gold medalist swimmer, what are the facilities like and how are we going to create that in Brisbane? For getting into the pool, I even look at the access and how you have to get lifted into the pool. Is there any other ways that we can do that and look at real access and showcase things to the world as to what Queensland can do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Now, part of the issue with a lot of the ideas that I want to do and you want to do and other people want to do is, as you know, with an Olympics and Paralympic Games, we're really got our hands tied a little bit by the legislation, by the rules of what the organising committee sets. And, as much as I would love to say that we've got this great idea so that someone doesn't have to be lifted into the pool by two people. And we could have maybe like a track hoist, for example, on the ceiling, and you just pop it under your body if you're in a wheelchair, and you takes you all the way even across to your lane, right? It would be incredible. But I don't see that sort of solution happening because we're going to have to really change the minds of the people who are organising it, and that's something that is probably going to take many, many years. But I would really encourage, though, that perhaps we write a bit of a proposal and we go, this is what we would like to do for Brisbane 32. It hasn't been done before. Doesn't mean it's not possible. The only thing is it would take obviously quite a lot of money. Old venues would need to be assessed if they were structurally safe to be doing something, for example, like ceiling hoist. But it would definitely make it a lot easier and simple. But it would also change the way of what we do for future events as well. It's a really good question though, because I think we can really expand on it, and we can perhaps write up a proposal for Brisbane 32 Organising Committee about these kind of scenarios and what we want to do with it and how we can do it.
Rachel, if we look at dignity, how much more dignified would it be with the ceiling hoist, lowering you into the lane, not having two people grip you and put you into your spot into the pool?
Absolutely. And this is where it comes down to, as you know, it's not just about what is easiest, but it's also about giving a person with a disability their dignity back. Because there seems to be this assumption from society that when you have a disability, the help you receive is how they want to do it and not how you would like it done. And it's a really bad way that people think, and it would really be good to change that. But also, from a media standpoint, there's cameras everywhere. They are seeing angles of you that can be compromising. They don't always know what to focus on, and sometimes they'll see something and they focus on someone lifting you into the pool, and it's not the best look for you or the support people. So you don't want to become a story that people talk about. And that is something that we do sometimes see from the Paralympics, where people will laugh at people. They will talk about and go, oh my God, did you hear what happened to this athlete and how they handled her and how they did this and that? And it becomes a laughing point where it should be a learning point. And I think this is where we could really change those sort of things, so that, if there's cameras, for example, set up right by the pool where people get lifted in, sometimes they're seeing things that doesn't need to be on camera. So it'd be really good to change the way of how we can do it. But sometimes that's going to mean we need land and we need a new building, because there's some things that we can't put in our existing buildings, which is very unfortunate. I would love if we had millions of dollars and we could just buy the land we need and completely redesign it, because imagine how good Brisbane 32 would be if we did that. But at the end of the day, we still have hills, we still have, a lot of access issues that we can't get rid of. But I really think something that could come out of today is that we write up a very strong proposal, and we justify it with not only the key themes of conversations that come out of today and other ones, but also just basic human rights of how do we help a person to do sport, but also how do we help somebody who is a spectator wanting to come to a venue? How do we best support someone who is employed to work at that venue? There's so many things that can come out of Brisbane 32 that I think we can do up a document and send it off, because I think it would be really good.
Thank you.
Well, Rachel, Steve, we've got another question coming in, so you want to go to the next question?
Absolutely. This one's actually for Josh and Rachel again. Then we've got one for Julie. So briefly, what is the major opportunity that you feel, Josh, first of all, that Paris missed during the games?
Look, I think I'll piggyback off what Rachel just said there about road testing. I think the will was there, and certainly all the politicians and the officials in Paris wanted to boast about how inclusive they were. But when it came to on the ground, sometimes there was just, it didn't work. There were people there who wanted it to work, but it wasn't. So I think road testing was, if there had been more road testing, and maybe it came down to time and resources, but had they have done that on the ground, I think it would have smoothed out a few wrinkles. I think the other element would be what I was talking about when I was speaking, that they're trying to retrofit a city that is hundreds of years old, and in some cases there are so many issues that it's taking a lot of time. But when you look at Brisbane, I was just talking the other day to John Sharp, who runs River Life. That's the kayaking, the hire place down on the Brisbane River. Now, he's actually embarking on an epic proposal, and he thinks he can pull it off in about a month or two. He's going to start the first wheelchair Brisbane Story Bridge climb for people who use a wheelchair. Now, to my mind, I when I was speaking to him about that, I said, well, how are you going to pull that off? He's like, oh, it's easy. We just fit this to that, and we put an electronic ramp in, and we'll be able to lift people who use wheelchairs right up to the top peak. And so I'm thinking, well, if we can do that in Brisbane, like why couldn't they have done that in some of the historic places in Paris? What was stopping them? So I'm taking that with the positive attitude that we can build on Paris. But if I was to look back and pinpoint something, it would be, the road testing that had intent, but sometimes it just didn't pay off.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Josh. Rachel, have you got anything else to add on what you've already said in regards to that question?
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Josh, for saying what you just said. I think it really highlighted some really common issues there. I would probably say one thing that I think Paris missed is the opportunity to do more promotion and more media with people who have a disability, who aren't, for example, the most successful or the most well-known. And the reason I say that, and I'm not talking about Australia, I'm talking about organising committee in Paris, is out of the games, we often see, after Paralympic Games, we see more people with a disability wanting to engage in sport, and we see more people with a disability wanting to engage in whatever opportunity they want. And the thing is, if they don't see someone represented like them in that moment is then lost. That opportunity is lost. So we really need to think, I feel we really need to think about how can we make sure that every disability profile is being represented, but also being given a voice, so that they can see that not only are people seeing that side of it, but they're also not expecting just to see a gold medalist on the TV. So I want to see anybody. I want to see everyone doing whatever they love doing promoted, because that's life, right? We're not all Olympians or Paralympians. Not all of us have won a gold medal. And I don't want people feeling that when they watch a Paralympics that they have to achieve something like that to then feel like their life is worth it. And I know that might sound a little bit insane, but when people watch a Paralympics, they get inspired, right? But some people actually tell me that they get disheartened. They get disheartened because of how it's portrayed, and they get disheartened because they're waiting on their moment to be shown to them, for them to know that it's possible for them to now try sport and to give it a go. Or they're waiting to see someone like them who might be reporting and might be doing a story, or it could be anything, any opportunity. So I think we really have a really good chance to harness that more for Brisbane 32 and bring the stories to not only our own, so people living in Australia, but let's make it global so that people can see what we do well in Australia.
Well said. Okay, next question is actually for Julie. Julie, how can we make sure that standards used in building accessible housing for Paralympians translates into better housing standards and solutions in Australia moving forward? That's a good one.
Yeah, it is a great question. And I think, there's already a fair bit of work done recently around the universal access provisions under the building code. So, the minimum standard and the bar has been shifted nationally. Unfortunately, we do have optional buy-in to those standards around the nation at the moment. So Queensland has done a great job in holding the line and requiring that. There was a fair bit of pushback from industry around the additional cost. But I do think that, of course, the village provides the opportunity to demonstrate exemplar into this space. And the design brief for that should be, not just for able body Olympians, but also for those that require modifications. And I'd hope that brief deals with all sorts of requirements around universal access, and that can lead to better, typologies and models that can be then used to transfer into sort of market provisions and used as exemplars across the broader market.
Thank you for that, Julie. So we've got a question from Tim Fell from the newly minted Games Independent Infrastructure and Coordinations Authority. That's a bit of a mouthful, Tim. Question for Rachel and Josh. Did you get a sense of change or improvement in the attitude of the general public towards people with disability in Paris and general France? Did you notice any shift in attitude? We'll go to Josh first.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think there was an overwhelming sense that everyone was proud to put on a games that was supposed to be inclusive, at least from the outset. I did see volunteers moving, as much as they could to assist someone, whether that was a spectator or even some of the volunteers themselves. Some of them had aids on hand if they needed it to help out in their daily requirements as a volunteer. So there was an overall sense of celebrating inclusion in that space. So I would argue, I mean, my previous games was Beijing, so that was some years back. But around Paris, and the excitement of Paris was to be an inclusive games, and that's the whole point of it, right? It's to bring everyone together. That was the attitude. The practicalities had some shortfalls, but I think there was an overwhelming sense within the attitude and the people on the streets there that they would try and help if they could, and they wanted to make it so everyone could enjoy it and everyone was at the table.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I saw was, and I know it feels like I'm repeating what you're saying, Josh, but honestly, the volunteers were incredible. They were so happy to be there, and that then made the public happy. So when they spread that joy around, it made people who they might have been stressed, and you saw them, it was really, really hot. They were stressed the minute they walked into a venue. Once the volunteers were there, they calmed down, they were happy. So I think it made people really appreciative of just the fact they were there, especially after Tokyo with COVID. Everyone was just really, really pleased to be there and to go. We've got a Paralympic Games, we've got an Olympic Games, we've had a normal experience. We haven't had this concern that we're going to get COVID and we're not going to be able to either compete or we're not going to be able to work there. And a lot of people were talking about day-to-day things that they never thought about before. So it was really interesting to see, and I think it just shows that how good events like this are for people.
Thank you, Rachel, for that. Another question that we've got from Brendan, a QDN member, who said there has not been too much mention about ticketing and accessibility of the system. Can you share anything about your experience and learnings from Paris, either to Josh or Rachel around this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't have experience in ticketing myself, so I would like to find out more, because from the only thing that I do know is that it was very hard to come by tickets, and it was a case of people getting on the internet and trying to fight it out. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm probably not the best to answer that.
Yeah. Rachel, have you got any experience, or you probably didn't need it?
Okay, so I don't have experience as in direct for me, but I do know people that tried to get tickets to watch my event and they weren't able to. Now it was similar in the sense that, you know, if you want to go to a show here in Brisbane, if you're got access needs, you can't ring up, you can't book online, you have to ring up or you have to email. And it can often be quite frustrating because sometimes you're waiting 3 days to hear back via email, or you're waiting a good hour or more on hold if you ring. So firstly, it'd be really good to see if in the planning for Brisbane 32, we could develop a new ticketing system that does not discriminate if you have a disability, but it is the same way where you can go online and book a ticket. You can write in your access needs and it's all sorted and it's simple and it's easy. But that probably sounds too good to be true, but it's good to think about it. The other thing is it came in a package. So a lot of people were telling me that buy a ticket, they actually had to buy the accommodation package to get a ticket. And that was a lot more expensive. And for a lot of people, they just couldn't do it. There was also no guarantee, apparently, that if you bought a ticket, that ticket was going to get you to that event on a certain day or session that you wanted to go to. So my family were wanting to come and watch me, and they were told, we cannot guarantee that you will be given a ticket for your daughter's event. So they might have spent the money and not even been allocated a ticket on my race day. So it'd be really good if we can find a way to not have that happen for Brisbane, so that when people buy a ticket, they know that they're watching the race that they want to watch.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. We've got a question that just came in for Julie. Employment remains a significant barrier, as you've discussed, for people with disabilities. What strategies during your research have proven effective in creating meaningful and long-lasting employment opportunities during Olympic and Paralympic Games that you studied? That's another good question.
It is a great question. And I'll give a short answer rather than a long one, because the report does do a fairly deep dive into those events and businesses. I think an interesting observation is that there was great intent and willingness and purpose. And I think sort of the London Games had a 50% target for participation in employment in the media space. We couldn't find out the actual end result there of what it actually was on the ground. But some of the figures we did see showed a surge of around 3 to 4% of people in employment as a result of the Games and just directly after. But that then diminished. So the stickiness of what I call the employment space didn't actually eventuate, and they were more short-term opportunities. So most of those events aren't producing systemic change and altering business practices to have long-term inclusion. And I think most of us can see that at the moment. So really shifting the dial, and I think mandating some elements to then help businesses transform to embed better approaches and better practices for inclusion of people with disability needs to happen. Now, that takes time for systems to recalibrate. It needs support. It needs carrots and sticks. And so it actually needs significant investment, and it needs cultural change. A lot of people are fearful. They're not sure how to go about it. They want to do it. They are concerned the impact on their business as well. And I think, there needs to be some champions in this space. And the report very much focused on government being a leader and leaning in to actually develop some of these at scale. We did see some interesting, as I said, green shoots. Woolworths program was a fabulous example, and it's all about having someone at leadership level with a disability and having that lived experience sitting at the decision-making table and ensuring, I suppose, the initiatives that they try and put in place are as successful as they can be. And so they have an inclusion officer who sits on the leadership team, which I think is a great start. Again, it's about how that then washes through organisations in the programs that they deliver, and that requires education across all employees and employers as well. And so I think, that example there, and I think the SCA is just an incredible example as well, give us some hints about what we need to do. And, even the government, there was one department where they actually brought a person in that was interested and sat them there for 3 months and worked with them and gave them different things and understood their needs and their interests. And then from there, suggested where they could sit across government from a longer term placement perspective. And we said, gee, that's a great pilot. Wouldn't that be great to implement at scale? And so, I think there's still a long way to go for some of those systems. But I do call out that opportunity around sport and the role sport has as a great leveller and how it could actually play a key role from an employment side as well as a participation side in helping to shift the dial. So to me, government, sport, and probably education are the three areas I think are the three types of sectors that could be champions into this space.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. We've
And
got time.
Steve,
Sorry.
oh, sorry.
Rachel,
I was just going to say, further on from what you just said, Julie, this is where we could have opportunity for, if we know that there's people with a disability who are interested in sport and an employment pathway, we shouldn't be looking at the opportunity the year of Brisbane 32. Let's get them involved in smaller scale events, for example, local sporting competitions and whatnot, so that not only can they get a taste for how it's going to work for them, but the employers themselves can see that this is actually possible and we need to embrace this and we need to make this part of our plan really strongly for Brisbane 32 and the legacy of what Brisbane 32 is about.
Absolutely. Well said. Sharon, we just got one very quick question that's just came in, if it's okay, before we pass to
Yeah,
you.
we should do
And
it.
it's for Josh or Rachel. Did you see any examples of where the private sector played a role in building or highlighting inclusivity or accessibility during the Olympics? Now, that is a tough one to end up on. Did you notice any sponsors, any private sector companies who were leading the way during Paris?
Oh, I didn't see any myself, but I know that there were sponsors in that space. If I'd have gone in looking for it, I probably would be able to come back with some answers. Yeah, I didn't notice any that stood out. There was a lot of like art galleries and event spaces that were promoting it. And, they used a lot of the time they'd use the Paralympic logo, the little freegie, the red hat to use that to promote it, the Paralympic version of that. So I did see that, but I can't recall any specifics.
Thank you, Josh. Rachel?
Yeah, look, I was in obviously the athlete bubble, so I hate to say it, but I probably wasn't paying a lot of attention to that area. But I do think that it was definitely there. But perhaps someone on here can maybe do a little bit of research and
Of course.
find out some answers to that sort of question. But that's a great question.
Awesome. Thank you. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you guys for just such an insight into so many different areas of this space. I'm on that Legacy 2032 committee, and we've been dreaming the dreams, etc., looking at Elevate 2042, and this and the way that each of you are able to share that perspective of your lived lives in this space was so, I think, worthwhile to our discussion. I think that overall we have a way to go, but we need to start a lot of these things right now. We need to look at how we can educate. We need to look at the way that we are going to actually have accessible physical space. Josh, you spoke a lot about that from a perspective of someone who was just using different equipment. We need to make sure that we have venues, footpaths, transport, and all of those things that we need for everybody to make sure that we have a games that is worthwhile as an Olympics and a Paralympics, and that includes everybody. We need that ticketing to be correct. We need people, if they want to go to an actual venue, to support their loved one who's worked their entire life to actually do and participate, to actually have a chance to actually see that. We want to lead the world. So absolutely loved the conversations today. You guys are just amazing disability community, and our support and linkages and networking with QDN and across Queensland, I think, is standout. Thank you. Thank you for all your participation. Let's just keep it going, keep making it strong, keep having it a voice, and make sure that we do a good job and that our games are the most amazing games. Thank you, speakers, for today. And thank you, Steve, for your co-hosting.
No problem.
And thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon and look forward to talking to you soon.